Sam Darnold was the quarterback 2. Jalen Waddle was the wide receiver 4. We had Darren Waller. We had 5 top 10 running backs, 2 top 7 DSTs, and Theo Johnson. Sorry, I'm just naming all the players we had in last week's video and how they went last week. Let's do it again. Every week, I'll be bringing you a video answering 2 simple questions. Who should I stream this week, and who should I stash for the future on the Fantasy First Down? I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. It's week 6, and we are once again talking streamers and stashes. To keep things simple, we're going to define a streamer as any player you wouldn't usually start who is a viable option for this week. They may be on your bench or they may be on waivers, depending on your league. We'll define a stash as any player you could potentially find on waivers that you should stash for the future, either because they have a favorable matchup next week or because they could be a future fantasy star. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below, or you can find me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also find my full rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Be great if you could like and subscribe and stick around in the coming days for my Start Shit show as well. Let's get into it, and we'll start things off with the quarterbacks. Last week, I suggested stashing Matthew Stafford in preparation for his matchup against the struggling Ravens. Now it's time to use him. Stafford is the QB6 on the year and faces a Baltimore defense who has conceded the second most points to quarterbacks this season. This is an easy one. Start Stafford. Meanwhile, on the season, Mac Jones has 2 top 10 finishes and a worst finish of QB15. This week, he gets a top 6 matchup against the Buccaneers in what's likely going to be a shootout. With the possibility of Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall returning, though Pearsall is looking pretty darn iffy, Jones is a solid start again in week 6. If you're lacking a traditional weekly starter, the former Patriot is a great deep stream. Meanwhile, Bryce Young is one of my favorite streamers for this week as well. He faces the league's most susceptible defense to passing in the Cowboys. But if you need a stash, he could be good next week too against the Saints. He's a worthwhile pickup if you're struggling at the position or need cover for Josh Allen, who has a week 7 bye, or Lamar Jackson if he's healthy because he also has a week 7 bye, and you're in a deeper league. Running back wise, and with Chuba Hubbard out for week 6 probably, this is an obvious one. Unfortunately, Hubbard's injury announcement happened too late for me to mention that Rico Dowdle, my most owned player, weirdly enough, wasn't someone I could fit into last week's video. So just a note that he's a weekly start now until Hubbard returns. And that's particularly true in a revenge game against the Cowboys. And as with Hubbard, this happened too late for me to include last week, but Rachaad White is a weekly start until Bucky Irving returns. Note, he's a riskier start this week in a tough matchup against the 49ers, but I would still be starting him. Meanwhile, Bill, Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, finally has the starting job in Washington with Chris Rodriguez back to a change of pace role. In a great running matchup against the Bears, JCM is a solid start in week 6. Meanwhile, the Seahawks have consistently used Zach Charbonnet as a goal line and receiving back this season. Those are the 2 most valuable roles from an efficiency perspective in fantasy football, especially in PPR leagues. In games where the Seahawks are likely to trail, as is the case this week, according to Vegas, Charbonnet is a high upside, high risk streaming option. And it's all streamers in running back land this week. The Chargers take on the Dolphins, who are very weak against running backs in week 6. Though Kamani Vidal is a popular name, as Amari Demercado was last week, I expect Hassan Haskins to get the first opportunities. He was the first back into the game after the Amari and Hampton injury. He made the roster out of training camp and came off the field with the rest of the starters late against the Commanders. He's a risky but available streaming option this week. Just don't start him ahead of guys that are trustworthy. And meanwhile, running backs get injured more than any other player in fantasy, and we've certainly seen that this season, with the average top 36 running back missing an average of 2 games per season for fantasy. For that reason, your best bet in fantasy is to roster running backs who are an injury away from an every down role. Each week, I'll be listing my favorite running back stashes, only including players you won't be starting most weeks. Now, my favorites this week, Blake Corum, I feel like is in an excellent position if we see a Kyren Williams injury. Kendre Miller started taking over from Alvin Kamara. Kareem Hunt is getting all the goal line carries for Isaiah Pacheco. So he's someone you can even nearly start now if you're desperate. Plus, if there's Pacheco injury, all of a sudden I feel like he's going to play quite a bit. You'll see a bit of Brashard Smith, though. Brian Robinson is going to be very busy if Christian McCaffrey goes down. Same deal with Ollie Gordon and Devon Achane. DJ Giddens appears to be their replacement for Jonathan Taylor, who is getting a lot of touches, and I think the Giddens will take a lot of them. Taylor was the running back one last week, for example. Will Shipley appears to be going past AJ Dillon to take back that main backup spot from Saquon Barkley, but based on how Barkley's gone, not really sure how valuable that is. RJ Harvey is back to being a pure backup, but he does still have some value given how they're using J.K. Dobbins. Isaiah Davis is the clear backup to Breece Hall now. We've got Bashal Tuden backing up ETN. I don't know, limited value there. Same thing with Emmanuel Wilson. I'm not sure that he's going to have a clear every down role, Wilson, with Josh Jacobs out. So for that reason, Wilson is a little bit lower down the list for me. Coleman Angai with DeAndre Swift. I think it's a clear role for him, but it's not a very high upside role being the Bears back. Kid Mitchell finally got an opportunity to start. He is clearly the early down backup to Derrick Henry, though he's not going to do much most weeks unless there's a Henry injury. Raheem Mostert would once again started over Zamir White as the backup. He didn't start, he was the backup. If we see an injury to Genty, then I think Mostert's going to be the main guy. Ty Johnson appears to be once again ahead of Ray Davis. That's an interesting situation. And Zonovan Knight, at least for now, is the backup to Michael Carter. I actually thought Michael Carter might be out this week. Turns out it was the Michael Carter for the Jets, the cornerback. So that gave me heart palpitation for a moment because I've got Carter in quite a few leagues. Wide receiver-wise, and this has nothing to do with Calvin Ridley's Week 5 breakout and everything to do with his opponent. The Raiders are a top 5 matchup for receivers, meaning Ridley and his rookie teammate Alec Imanor could be in for big days. I wouldn't play them above your regular starters, but they're upside streamers with low floors. Meanwhile, it's been hard to trust Scary Terry this season, but if he plays, and that's a big if, against the Bears, I'm starting him for his upside in what should be a high-scoring matchup. Meanwhile, if you're going to have success against the Lions, it needs to be through the air. That matchup is the high-scoring over-under line I've seen all season, so Vegas is expecting a real shootout here, and I am too. That brings all Chiefs and Lions receivers into play. It's really hard to trust the likes of Isaac Tesla and Tyquan Thornton, though they do have clear upside. But Hollywood Brown has 40 targets so far this season through 5 weeks, and another big night could be in the offing, especially if the Lions quarterbacks remain banged up. Meanwhile, if you need a stash, the Panthers have struggled to find a consistent number 2 receiver behind Ted McMillan all season, leaving an opening for Jalen Coker to come in and make an impact. They're trading away Adam Thielen, signals that they believe they have the position sufficiently covered. But given how they've used everyone else, you have to think that Coker is a big part of their plans. He's a great stash if someone doesn't already have him on IR in your league. And this is for deep leagues only, but it seems rookie Pat Bryant is slowly making his way up the depth chart as he finally outsnapped Marvin Mims last week. 2 of them have 3 targets combined over the last fortnight, so as things stand, this is hardly exciting. But situations like this can change quickly, and it would only take one injury or a change in usage to make Bryant a sudden waiver wire darling. So, if your league was recently rostering the likes of Marvin Mims, now is the time to swoop for his rookie replacement. Tight end wise, and the Falcons are expected to engage in a high-scoring matchup against the Bills this week. And high-scoring games where the Falcons are trailing tend to be the domain of Kyle Pitts. The former fantasy star has seen his route count spike this season, and he could be in for a big week if things go his way. David Njoku and Harold Fannin, meanwhile, are guys that I'm interested in starting once again with Dylan Gabriel taking over. Gabriel passed for 13 tight end targets last week. That compares to only 11 wide receiver targets. He was really checking it down to the tight ends and running backs a lot, and especially looking at the tight ends in the red zone. This week brings the Steelers, who happen to be a top 5 tight end matchup, so you can't read into that too much early in the season. Given the Browns' 2 tight end set usage, I'm thinking another nice week could be on the cards for Cleveland's tight end pair. Meanwhile, a lot of people are already throwing Mason Taylor into their lineups, but I'm not there yet, as a lot of his usage had come in garbage time. He's well worth the stash, though, to see if his momentum can continue in the right direction. Meanwhile, kickers and DSTs, and the Packers get a juicy matchup against the Bengals, and Brandon McManus is a good kicker. He's a safe start this week given his extra point floor. Meanwhile, the Bills are projected to be a top 3 scorer against the Falcons, who are already a top 5 kicking matchup. While Matt Prater isn't as accurate or as long as he used to be, he's still a great option this week. Meanwhile, nobody has conceded more points to DSTs this season than the Bengals. I can see the Green Bay pass rushers really teeing off against Joe Flacco this weekend behind that very poor O-line. Old man Flacco is not going to know what hit him, so you want the Packers as a DST. And given they're probably not available, well, the Ravens were dismal with Cooper Rush under center against the Texans last weekend. I imagine the Rams could have similar success. And that's all we've got for our week 6 streamers and stashes show. As always, hit us up on socials if you've got any questions or in the comments below. It'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube as well. Look forward to chatting to you guys next time.